Welcome to Igniting an Innovative Leadership Mindset through Improv. My name is Andres Marquez Lara, and you'll notice I'm not there with you. I am a voice being recorded right now. Well, it turns out that I had to improvise in my own life, and we had to improvise because my wife went into labor earlier than expected, and that's why I'm not there with you. So instead, Salima and the Mavasive Leadership Institute and my company, we all had to improvise to be able to make sure that we still provided an excellent experience for you. So as part of that, I at least want to be able to give you some of the background that I think will support the experiential activity you'll have right now with the facilitator who's in front of you right now. So who am I? I am a therapist, I am an improv actor, and I am a community organizer. And I weave these passions of mine into my business called Promethean Community. We help leaders who are tackling complex social challenges in Latin America. We help them make sure they have the leadership skills, the mindset to be able to support their teams in being more efficient. We also support them by doing some group coaching and facilitation as well. I teach leadership development at Georgetown University as well as the George Washington University. And these are places where I also use these experiential approaches to teach students. So to give you some background, what is the Mavasive Leadership Institute? Well, the Mavasive Leadership Institute strives to help leaders develop emotional self-awareness and exceptional performance to positively impact their communities and organizations. And when I first met Salima and Grant, what really appealed to me was really their emphasis on emotional self-awareness. As a trained therapist, I'm a big fan of emotional intelligence, introspective work, and I really have seen that this is key and very much needed to be able to work in as a leader in this complex environment. So why are we here today? To be honest, we have a very short amount of time, so this is really an appetizer. This is just a mere introduction, and it's an introduction to how improv can really support us in developing the social emotional skills that we need as leaders in the 21st century. Now, this model, the Perry model, was developed by the Mavasive Leadership Institute and is basically as building on Goldman's emotional intelligence work. And here, just kind of very briefly, allows you to kind of see that when we talk about social emotional skills, we're talking about self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, relationship management, but also perception, empathy, resilience, and intuition. All these skills are what's needed to lead in this challenging, complex time that we live in. And improv actually is the perfect tool to help us gain and develop these skill sets. Before we move on, let's take a quick pause, and I just want to kind of get a sense of the room. So I want to first know, raise your hand if you've ever done improv before. And since I can't see how many of you are, as you're doing that, the facilitator will take note. And we'll see as a group how many of us have actually done improv before. And I guess raise your hand if you have never heard of improv. Actually, raise your hand if you had never heard of improv until today. Like the term is new to you, you never heard it before. Is that anybody out there? It's totally okay if it is. I mean, we just want to get a sense of the room because as all of you have done improv before, I think that activity and dynamic will be tailored different than if none of you have ever done improv before. And this is kind of the beauty of improv. We have to adapt to the current environment. And what we are doing actually as we speak, where I'm doing this presentation without knowing who's in the room, and then the facilitator in the room will have to be able to adapt to that environment. Let me give you some context before we go into the activity. I want to kind of provide some setting. What's a setting? What's the context in which leaders must be able to lead other people in the world? Well, we live in a complex, dynamic world. That's not a surprise to anybody, right? We live in a world that can be described as VUCA. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It was a term coined by the military in the late 1980s after the end of the Cold War. And basically, it was a way to say, hey, the environment in which we live in is very different than it was in the 50s or early in the 20th century or before that. It's more volatile, it's more uncertain, it's more complex and ambiguous. And in this VUCA context, leaders must be able to have certain abilities and characteristics to thrive. One of them is they must be able to go into the unknown. VUCA basically is a way to describe nonlinear processes. They must be nonlinear processes. You can't predict them because they are emergent, they are uncertain, they are ambiguous. And leaders in this context must be able to go into the unknown knowing that they won't be able to know exactly what's going to emerge from that. They must be able to adapt to change. They must be able to adapt to what's emerging in front of them as they're moving forward. They're building the plane as they're flying it, and they have to adapt to that situation. And leaders in this context must be able to play really well with others. They must be able to collaborate seamlessly and create environments for others to play with each other and collaborate. Because in a complex environment, it's about systemic thinking and systemic action. Because everything is moving, all the different parts are moving at the same time. So, how can improv support leaders in this context? What does improv have anything to do with this? Well, you may have already noticed or thought about this, but essentially, improvisers are experts in all three areas that are needed to lead in VUCA times. They're experts in going to the unknown, they're experts in adapting, and they're experts at playing well with others. Think about it, right? If you see an improv show, you'll probably see 4 to 6 to 8 people on a stage that they're usually wearing some black pants and either matching shirts or different colored shirts. And then somebody in the audience will say, they'll ask they'll give a prompt to the audience, like say, name a place and a tool, or what's the name of a song you like, and they'll just kind of randomly ask a question. The audience will respond, and then their job is to create an entire play, an entire scene, or multiple scenes based on that. So they are going to the unknown. Every time they stand on the stage, they have no idea what's going to happen. They are walking into the unknown. And they're doing that because they have the abilities and skill sets to adapt to no matter what emerges, they'll be able to create and play with it. And they're able to do that because not only are they able to have the skills individually, but they are so attuned to each other, they can build of each other and create something marvelous and miraculous. Now, for those of you that improvise, not all scenes or not all times you do it is a wonderful hit. But that's the activity. You have to develop these activities and muscles to get better and better and better. But once you have developed this, you're then able to be a talented improviser who can play with others, adapt to change, and be comfortable going to the unknown. Now, I also wanted to introduce you to a definition of improv that I really like. Because oftentimes, when at least I first got started on improv, I thought improv had to be funny. And I wasn't a funny person. I didn't consider myself to be a funny person, so that kind of turned me off a little bit to it. But then later on, years later, I came across a guy named Paul Z. Jackson. He's the president of a network called the Applied Improvisation Network, and this is a group of people that are using improv in different areas of life, in business, in health, in social change. I'm a member of this network. I've gone to their conferences and presented at them. And when I went to this conference, this is where I heard Paul first use the definition, which I love. So improv is the creation of a new, unprepared response to a challenging circumstance that integrates available resources found in context. Now, this not only applies to what's happening on the stage, you can clearly see that, but it also opens up the definition of improv to a whole host of different activities that we, perhaps not being, if you don't consider yourself to be an improv actor, hopefully you can see how you were able to do this. I am sure that if we went around each person here in the room, you could tell me of a time where you created a new unprepared response to a challenging circumstance that was able to integrate what was around you in your local environment. Whether it was at your office, at your nonprofit, at your school, university, whatever. I am sure that each one of you has a story that could fit this definition. So when you think about that, we are all improvisers. And that's what I love about this definition, because it's really about empowering all of us to remember this ability that we have as a species, and not just as a species, that we have because we are part of nature. Nature is all about improvisation. Nature is about you creating a new unprepared response to a challenging circumstance using what's around them. I mean, think about evolution and how we evolved over the years, how we adapted. That's in our DNA. So we are improvisers just because we're part of nature. So if this is such a big part of our DNA, if you will. What's going on? Why isn't improv more used in other contexts? Why is it only mostly used on the stage? Well, I think part of this has to do with the fact that we have overdeveloped and strengthened our the kind of mindset and skill sets that are really good at planning, measuring, and executing. And that's wonderful. I mean, these skill sets of planning, measurement, and executing is what allowed us to build the society that we live today. It was our ability to plan, it was our ability to see patterns and plan around that that led us to go from hunters and gatherers to be able to then create more farming communities and create the agricultural revolution. And the whole scientific revolution is built on our ability to basically observe, test, measure, and refine from that. But this then got taken to a whole other level in the past 20th century when we started thinking about it's all about planning and execution and very much linear thinking. But what happened then? So we developed this really strong muscle that allowed us to be able to plan and execute. But what happened then is that now we live in a context where linear thinking no longer applies as much in certain areas, right? Yes, if you're building a building, yes, if you are, if your car ran out of gas, you have to fill it out. There are some problems that are linear. I'm not denying that. But the kind of challenges that we face as a species, as a world, the complex social challenges, are nonlinear in nature. They are VUCA challenges. They're filled with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And for those challenges, that really well-developed muscle does not work. It is not adaptive to to what we need to do. We have to then begin to strengthen our other muscles so we can improvise. So this workshop is really kind of to let's go to the gym. Let's work out our social emotional muscles. Let's really kind of get and do some activities that are going to help us kind of get aligned with this and recognize, I think, for those of you that go to the gym or haven't gone in a while, sometimes you'll do a move or something and you won't really feel sore, but then the following day you're like, oh wow, I had no idea I had a muscle there, or that feels sore. And I think sometimes we all have these muscles, but sometimes we don't use them, or sometimes we do use them, but we didn't know that we could do them we could use more of them. The metaphor of the gym is also apt because before we can actually go to the gym, if you're doing a workout, you have to stretch. You have to do some warm-ups, and that's the thing about experiential activities. Uh, Oftentimes, people will just say, hey, let's do a role play. Let's play some improv. And I know that those of you who are introverts in this room, are cringing at the thought of oh my God, I'm going to have to do some acting in front of people, and that's completely normal. But what happens is if you're able to warm the group up, then it makes it easier for everybody to be able to act, even people who consider themselves to be introverts. What happens is if we don't go through a proper warm-up process, it can be quite painful, especially for those that are introverts. So we're going to do a series of activities to warm us up, to get to know a little more about the space, who we are, the space, the room, and then we're going to guide you through a series of games, and then we're going to ask you to reflect about these games and how it applies to them, how it applies to your life, and how you see them tied to leadership. So before we get into the warm-ups, right, I do want to provide some structure and some guidelines. We're basically going to be doing some activities that require us to create a safe space. Now, I have a pet peeve. I hate it when people say, this is a safe space, share what you want. That doesn't work that way. A space by itself is not safe. The safety gets created. And for some of you, perhaps, again, who are very comfortable improvising and acting and being extroverts, in this context, you'll feel safe very quickly. But for others, perhaps for different life experiences or whatever, it takes more time. And that's something that all of us need to create together so we can feel more comfortable as we all push ourselves to go beyond our comfort zone. Because this activity and this appetizer, we're going to practice going into the unknown, we're going to practice adapting, and we're going to practice playing with others. But to do that, there's some guidelines that I think will help us. And these guidelines, actually, you all probably learned sometime when you were very young in school. The first one is let's listen to each other, right? That's really key and important. The second one is let's listen to each other. Oftentimes what happens is it could be happening right now, but basically you listen to somebody, right? And then you remember something they said, or you think of an idea and you check out, right? And you're no longer listening to what they're saying because you're not actually in that moment with them. So next, respect each other. Let's be respectful of each other. let's be curious. And this will be really important, as we start, playing around, like be curious not only of other people, but also about your own reactions. Now, it's really important that, as the curiosity, like if see something that makes you, well, what was that? Don't say, what was that? like with a tone, right? In your head, say that if you want. But sometimes I think the curiosity is more like for your internal voice. Because what happens is if we share our our curiosity in a way that could be perhaps not the best, it can shut people down, right? Like, well, that was weird. Why did you do that? Like, if I said that to somebody as they're trying to do something new, do you think they would do it again? Probably not, right? So curiosity is more like, oh, I wonder, like, have an internal reaction, like, I wonder why they did that. But just keep it to yourself because that's going to help us then stay in the moment. And last but not least, these are two key rules of improv, which are all have to do with yes and make your partner look good. Basically, when you do improv, these are the two basic principles of improv. There are many more, but these are like the foundational two. So what I want you to do is, as you're playing with people, as you're exploring and doing these different activities, think about how do I build with what they just said to me, and how do I make your partner look good? And actually, you could start just you're doing that right now in many ways because you are listening to a screen of a pre-recorded voice, and I'm assuming, and I'm going to picture you paying attention and engage, right? And in that process, you are making me a faceless voice look good. So, and I'm making you look good because you're also looking as very attentive, engaged audience, and we're building with each other, right? If, for example, if we were doing a skit, right, and I said, let's go to the beach, and the other person said, no, let's go to mountains, you see, like that energy would just kind of die down. It would create conflict, and we wouldn't make our partners look good. Now, and the basic principles of improv is about like, hey, let's go to the beach, and then somebody says yes, and let's invite the entire group, and then somebody says, and let's bring some beer, and let's bring whatever, and like we can just see how the energy flows and moves forward. So these are just some basic guidelines that I want to invite you to. You don't have to write them down, you don't have to remember them, but just to kind of get in the spirit of creating an environment for us to play with each other and explore how improv can really help us develop this leadership mindset. At this point, because it's going to be very interactive, and we're not at a place where I can facilitate without knowing what's happening in the room, I'm going to turn it over to the great facilitator who's with you right now, who's going to be able to take you through a series of warm-up activities and then some improv games or some activities that are going to then allow you to experience what we're talking about in this intro that I just did. And then they're going to take you through a brief debrief process for you to then say, well, what's the connection? Did I experience the connection? How do I see improv tied to my development as a leader in my world? And then that's what's going to happen. So at this point, I'm going to sign off, bid you adieu. I'm going to go welcome my daughter into the world, and I'll be saying that, hey, this will be a story to share with her, that before her birth, I recorded a presentation that was shared with youth at the World Bank for the Global Summit for Youth. And again, I'm very honored that I was able to participate in this way. Thank you for allowing me to do this, and I hope you have a great time in the experiential part of this activity.